Hi, we want to talk about section 7 of Big Java early objects. And we're going to be talking about arrays and array lists. So we're starting with arrays and breaking it down to smaller videos. So we're going to have a few parts with arrays and then two-dimensional array, and then we move on to array list. So my assumption is you're coming in from CS2, meaning that you had some prior programming, so you should be familiar with arrays. So I'm not going to go too detailed on the array, but we get to the most important parts. So we know that when we have an array, it's going to be a list of things. So instead of creating like 15 variables, we're just going to create a list and we're going to call it one thing. And the way that we're going to be doing it in Java, let me move this right here. Okay, so for first step is we're going to create a name for the array. Second step is we're going to create a new array and we're going to move the address to that one. Remember, we are doing the objects in Java. So most of the work we're doing in Java is through classes and object. Java is the true object-oriented language, meaning that almost everything in Java is going to be true objects. So if I want to use any kind of object, I have to create it first. So I have to create it. And I want to mention on this, we have practiced on this on chapter 2 and 3. And here again, that when I am creating values, so when I create values, it doesn't contain anything in it, which is the null. It's initialized to null. When I create a new double, I am going to build this new object of array. I'm going to get the address of this object from the memory, and I'm going to insert the address of the memory into the values by the equal sign that we have here. So we are going to create a new object of array. We're going to get the address of that, and we're going to insert it in these values, which is type of array of double. So we have to be careful with that, and we're going to get back to this, how we're going to do these things. So we talked about it, that if I want to create a new array, I'm going to use the word new to create an object. I need the lengths for it. So we got to tell ahead of time how many do we want. So Java does initialize these things. It's not like C++. Java initialize all the elements of the array to if it's number, it's going to be 0. If it's a string, it's going to be null. So automatically it does that. You don't have to worry about it. You can make your own initialization for your array. So what's going to happen is if you don't put definitely the lengths of this, you can put it as braces, and then it's going to pick up the numbers. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the size is going to be 10 automatically, and then it's going to be initializing it to this from the 0 to 9, just like C++. So we're going to be using the bracket to access any element in our array, just like you had in your CS2. So again, we're going to be declaring a variable, then we're going to create a new object of array. We're going to put the address of it in here, and then we can use the brackets to get to something. So in this case, we have values bracket 4. Remember, we are starting at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be this index over here. That's the 5th element, because we always are starting with 0. And then we can set that to 35. Again, I'm going a little faster on this because you guys have this already. So we are not, I'm not going to spend too much time on these things. So starts with 0, ends with 9 if my size is 10. One thing that we're going to be, yeah. So if I have, so if the length of my array is 10, and I try to put something in that. Remember, in C++, you can't do that. You just go in there and insert it here. In Java, it's going to throw an exception. So it says it's out of bound exception. So that it's going to catch it for you. It's going to throw an exception. We learn how to handle those exceptions. So some ways that we can do it, we can have a size of my array as a final, as a constant variable, and then we can use that one. Or we can read it from the user. You could not do this in C++. You can read it from the user, then create your array with that length that you read from the user. And now we have here, what do you think is the problem with this section? So take a look at this, and what do you think the problem is? The problem is in here. So the problem is I have the data on type double, and then I'm trying to create a new object of int array and put it in the double array. They don't match, so we're going to have a problem. Again, every time there is a problem, Java is going to throw an exception, and then we're going to figure out what to do with that exception. So, as I mentioned before, when you are creating an object of array, it's going to happen in the memory. So when we use the word new, or we use the initialization, it's going to go in the memory, it's going to create an object of it, and then it's going to return the address. So when we have the value scores over here, the score is going to contain the address of the object in the memory. Now, because it's containing the address, when I say value equal a score, I am taking the address that I had for a score and I put it in the values. That means they both going to have the same address. That means they both are pointing to the same location. So if I change one of them, the other one is going to change too. So this is something that we want to be sure that we don't do it. We don't do this. So this is not going to be something that we generally want. And this is not only for arrays. We're going to be talking about all the objects that we create from the classes, and that's going to be applied to all of them. So a good way of looking at this is we are using the for loop to go through it. You can see that the length, even though it is an instance variable, it is public, so you can actually access it as, from outside. So it lets you do the length. It is not a method. It is just the instance variable length of the class array. So we are taking that one. So we are going to be using dot length. And why do you think we're going to be using the dot length? The reason for that is your lengths can be changed or it can be different. So we don't have to worry about it here. Remember, we could define it as a constant variable, a final. And if we change the final, then it's going to change our size of our array. And then we're going to have a different lengths over here that we don't have to worry about it. So when we calling this method with this score, then it's going to do the total and it's going to return it. So you might remember this from your C++ class. Because arrays have fixed lengths, then we might get into some situations that we don't have enough. So we are not filling up the whole thing. So at the beginning of the term, I might have 30 students in my class or 35 students in my class. And then by middle or toward the end, some people drop the class. So I would have, let's say, 27 students. So if I go through all the array that I created, first of all, how many elements do I want to do? Because sometimes I have 35 students, sometimes I have 30 students, sometimes I might go to 40 students. So what's the size of my array I want to fix to put it in there? So if I create an array with the size 40, and then in the middle of the term, I'm only using 27 of it, I have to have a mechanism to not to go outside of that. So I have 1 through 27. I don't need to go anything after that because let's say I'm doing the average score. If I go further down, then I have zeros in there and it's going to throw the average out. So to accomplish that, we're going to use some kind of a size or length, and then we're going to create that one, the array, but then we're going to keep track of something. We're going to call it current size. We can call it whatever we want to call it. And this is going to keep track of how many elements do I have in my array. So one way of doing it is when I'm reading from the user, I am going to be filling up my array. So this is going to be my fill up array. And I'm reading it from the user and I'm filling up my array. Now, you can see here, we are checking the current size to be sure it is not equal or greater than the length. Remember, in this case, the length was 100. We don't want to have current size at 100 because if we use 100 here or more than 100, we're going to be out of bound. So it's going to be an exception handler. And as we doing this, so starting point is 0, then 1, 2, 3, 4. So every time I'm adding 1 to my current size. Another point that I want to make over here, you can see in this area, if my current size is equal or greater than the length, I'm not doing anything. So I am not doing anything. I'm just going to be concentrated on this. So if the user keep putting the stuff in there more than my length, I'm just not going to add it to the array. We just eliminate, just throw it away. So we're going to create a final length. We're going to create a new object of array. We're going to return its address, and values is going to contain the address of this new object. And then we're going to set the current size to 0. We're going to start reading from the user. And then as far as it has a double, I'm going to be doing this. So this is a picture of what we're talking about, the current size. So I might have 100, 500, 20, 30, whatever, but I only used 4 of them. So from that point on, after I fill my array, from that point on, I'm going to be just using that. We're going to call it current size in here for the example that we have in the book, or we can call it whatever you think is proper for it. So we have a size or a length for our array, and then we have the current size that's going to keep track of how many elements do I have in my array. So from this point on, whenever I want to access stuff in my array, instead of the lengths that we used before, we're going to use current size. So I'm not using values.lengths. I'm not using values.lengths because I don't want to go through all the array. I just want to go through the section that I have some elements in it. So some of the errors that can happen while we are doing arrays, that's the array bound error. So if I try to go outside of my boundaries, remember C++ does not check that, the Java does check it. So if I have a length of 10 and I try to access the index 10, that would be an error, because if I create a 10, I'm going to start with 0, I'm going to end with 9. So the 10 would be an error. So we will have exception, and the exception is array index out of bound exception. And in next chapter, we learn how to handle our exceptions. The next error would be the uninitialized array. So we talked about this, that if you create a variable for a type array and you don't use the new, it would not have, it's not pointing to any arrays. It's just pointing to null. It doesn't have nothing to point. So when you try to add something to it, it's going to have an error exception. So variable values might not have been initialized. It's going to tell you something about it. So the reason for that is there is no array created. So we don't have no array that's created to be able to use it. So the proper one, as you should know by now, is to create a new object and put the address of the new object into the values. Of course, we could do this in one line. Remember, we can do this in one line. And then now we can put something in. So we have to have, we cannot work with the class only. We need to create an object. Then we can use the object. So we have to build the object before we use it. We have to build the house before we use it. You have to build the car before you use it. So when you have an object, you have to create the object before you use it. So this can be a common mistake that we might do here and then. I want to mention this one. This was very interesting that the Java can do is if you have a method and the number of parameters is going to vary, then we can have a format of doing this. So in this case, we are going to put the data type. We're going to put 3 dots and we're going to put the name over here. So what's going to do is going to take this and it's going to put it in an array for us. And the size of array is going to be set to the number of parameters that's going to be going through. So the first one that's going to be passed with 2 parameters, the length is going to be 2. The second one that's going to be passing with 4 parameters, the length is going to be 4. So from this point on, it's exactly the way that we were doing it before. Just a for loop that goes through the length of the array and it's going to do whatever it needs to do. But we can pass different parameters, different number of parameters. I think this was very interesting and I want to be sure that you understand it and hopefully you're going to be using it as much as possible. So I'm going to stop right here and then we're going to continue with the part. So you can stop right here and go do your self checks. That's for this section.